Coming into platforms, we have to really understand how to identify ourselves. We have to really understand how this all works in all formation to its setting. Okay. School is extremely powerful in set locations. Okay. Look at my hair. It's traveling in all directions. Right. It's amazing how we try to formate its system locations with balance. Balance is the key to all formation. So we have to look at and see ourselves in other ways and forms, right? The calculations to species lines and machines now is going to higher line division, more modification screens, higher adaptation lines of close-ups, predicting high center positional operation surface. This retriangulates the program location setting when you come into all levels of compute screens. That puts you in a provision lines of scanning. You have to learn how to get into scan our bodies. Because March 1st is the line setting the screen lines. Adaptation location is the checking points into docking. We have to start recognizing all this in platform. What does that mean through travel? What does that mean through mind? Well, the mind itself is going to interpret its own system, which basically in that formation line condition, which is done automatically. So once you go into the cerebros, it's like set lines to all calculation species lines in one big elevator. Now, position of mind conception line screens and high center interference and position program location setting with the rebellion. The rebellion is going to go in the center line calculation setting to the files, putting their positions first, interactions. Combinated compute systems, the alteration line setting in mind of consciousness. This puts all calculation near placebos out of thought position of channels. The operation line calculation setting puts a holographic set application of streamlines, puts them into more modifications of their ESPs, external sensory perceptions. But it's not just the outline cycles, it's the inside position that they have to recognize. So in that communication line positions, they have to get into all levels of scanning, how to scan your body inside. This is the whole process that we're coming into. Okay? Because everything around you is trying to figure you out. It's trying to understand, are you understanding what I am? Do you understand why I'm a structure of a wall? Do you understand why it's standing? Right? These are the understanding of its communication system because everything around you, again, has its own purpose, has its own existence. You have to find that inside of you. You have to find that existence and its purpose. That gives you a true identity of what you guys are coming into, not just your memories. Okay, this is about you coming into you unconditionally. The unconditional line screens are anything in the adaptation system to its location settings. All right, thank you there very much, Emdal. Appreciate that. I know you were busy and I know you were working. Just want to know where your 20 was, so you're back on the bridge. It's good. Knowing where everybody is, especially with the team has to be aware of everything inside of these travel lights. All right, so the link is open up on Tuesday. Okay, go to my TikTok, my Tree platform. That will open up position locations. Anybody that wants to go to Q&A and settings and travel. Okay, so how do you say position of structure lines and streamlines position of programs? The compute line settings and face position travel calculation lines, the species, the machines, the thimbots, the androids, the connection highest variance, the transformers are in position of space. Coming towards lines of space, lines in universal location system, adaptation of surface. The retriangulation program lines and high center interference compute system line calculation setting is now in a level calculation position that's programmed. That's where you guys have to really get into your scan line screens, get in your position of travel calculations. Mind in the consciousness has a concept valve. That concept valve is its mystical valve. That's the location to your inhibitors. That's in the back of your neck. Setting lines and scale lines of position of probe locations, setting holographic set locations. Put everybody in the recharge calculation. So get into that lines of specification line screens. You come into all lines into a program location operation surface. This angle points its point lines of tracks. Point here, and point here, and point here. Set position of 3 in position line conditions, right? 3 over lines of 2. Okay, so we have to understand how to identify the species lines because they come in plasma communication of channels, indirect signal locations, op signals, op positions, op programs, all calculation line position setting. Okay? 2 tracks, 3 tracks, 4 provisions, 5 sectors. Okay? Platitude lines and geometric operation lines, high calculations. Map in sequence, positions programs, sets lines of communication to its settings. Okay? So we all have to recognize what's going on with the species correlations of panels now. The direct signals is coming into high line setting in security. Positions of its program location setting sets lines at 4 lines and 5 in perimeter in set location of travel. Direct into modification line screens comes in op signals. Position lines set lines of bracket and inference into 0. Position of 1 line, 1 graph. Sets lines into VAS. Sets position of program lines, cross line equalized communications. Sets lines in equal-line communication of 0, 1. Sets position 24 in Pacific locations of 48. Sets lines of 72 and track location of 144 provision lines in track location line settings and set locations into 7 lines of operation. Okay? Very complicated stuff. So the species current rate and high center interference is 7 lines calculation items at 12. Okay, travel through 12. So the position lines into the species communication streamlines has to understand the clockings of space now. Okay, so if you understand the space lines and position travels a timeline sequence, understand line conditions of timelines in space line communication. Crossing symbols is line directing lines of triangulation line screens, guys. Putting triangulations over top signals into platitude line rotation surface. Re-angle points, line calculation setting in point tracks. Point line divisions and molecule design lines into 3-line provisions and cycles of communications. Directing lines calculation high interference in holographic set location of travel. Setting business line calculation into box centers and a 4-box screen in set location operation. Point lines of tracks, colorations of screen lines, and adaptation. Okay, Althorp's equation. Yeah. Setting communication lines and mapping sequence. The panel communication lines a digital frame. That's 1 indicate line screen. Setting lines of a digital frame center. Sets communication line settings in position location line system. Java calculation lines, cross line symbols. Flux capacitor line change. Directing lines of communication and setting. Okay? This is all through mapping, guys. So this correlates to calculation high interference. This is where the species are coming into track lines, into memory set lines and cortex stream locations, into the settings of the cerebro. The cerebro has a detect line screen in high calculations and position of its programs. Now, position line calculation high interference is recognizing all communication settings to your infinities in high position of all calculations, right? Setting lines of communications in a 4-track line provision, and I scepters instruction calculation settings of inspection. Okay. So getting into that, we come into the cluster calculation lines of galaxy lines. Species has to get informations how to go into line setting in travel calculations, how to go into modification line screens in set locations, how to go and direct signal of panel communication surface and triangulations, and how to get into point track line divisions into ESP and track location. Okay, that my equation. So the mechanism high screens, positioned to its location centers, has to modify the screen location. Now, in that position of travel lines, the species in the correlation line centers has a 1-track provision. Okay, 3 center line settings, interactions, right? 4 indicator line platforms and set locations. Directing lines, crossing line, and platform communication. Directing lines of point centers, 1 point, 2 point, and 3 lines of measure. Puts position lines in position location settings into 4 calculations. Direct lines of 4 equals lines of 3 and 7 in provision. Okay. Now the center correlation setting is going to change the track lines in center calculations. Now in direct line calculation setting in position locations, we take the 7 lines into the center operation. Sets position line centers, we take the 0 calculation of 4 tracks into 0, into 0, into 0, into 0 set location. Right in direct line centers, we take the line calculation setting to ground lines, op system, op system, op system to 4 settings. Okay, so we cross the signals in cross line connection of symbols. changes graph calculation lines into one indicated lines in equal lines in between and three sectors in position programs. Directing communication line crosses lines, T receptors, theta communication. Balance calculation lines crosses lines of 1, position of 2, position of 3, and position of 4, and position of 5, and position of 6, and position of 7, and position of 8 in set locations of travel. Directing is a modification lines of 4 indicate lines of zeros in position location of 4 indicate lines of space, puts position in cycles in set location of travel. Point lines of tracks into astral projections in set location. Okay? Get into modification lines, setting lines of domes, and streamlines and high center interference in set position calculations. Okay? Complicated stuff. All right, that's done. So what I'm doing is basically getting everybody ready to understand how they go into the cortex streamlines, into the points, the clockings, and the charter waves. Everybody understand what a charter wave is? It's a line indicating position of a program and 3 indication lines of high lines of lacing lines of communications to your TV box application of setting. Okay, waving central lines of 1, 2, 3 panels. Position lines of sun and the moon and one track line setting in one optical system in calculations with space recognition. One channel communication streams indicates lines of alpha, that sets lines of alpha line rotations into delta, sets lines of theta, sets lines of grounds, alpha, delta, theta comes into high calculation streamlines, is set in position of travel lines into the core center of the sun in track location. Okay? Directing lines of modification line screens puts everybody in a spectrum calculation stream. Modifications in cross lines and setting lines in high position to your Merkabahs, right? Setting communications looks like a kite, right? Point lines of track, graph calculation stream, direct lines of point centers. Each intelligence has a graphing screen and position of its GPS. Wherever it's traveling, setting line communications is intelligence, is its modification of its UFO or anything through its travel, has it indicated a point centers of its position of mapping sequence. So it knows exactly what it's doing and where is it going. So the background has a screen line lock, sets lines of platform and communication setting, cross line symbols and travel calculations. Point lines of settings indicates position programs, direct signals. Puts position travel lines in space anomalies, opens all levels of platforms in communication setting, so it can walk its system and travel in its travel communications in set location. Okay? So that's what the species has to come into. They have to come into their mapping sequence of space lines anomaly, get out of the Earth in position track lines. You got to get out of this. Okay, this is the Earth, right? You got to get out of the 12 clocking system in line connections into 24 lines, 48 lines, 72 computer, and 144. They got to get into the crystal grid screen settings of travel. Modification line screens, 1, 2, 3, 4 lines of calculations, right? Getting out of the 12, come into the 24 cycles in position of travel in a 45-degree split lines of anomaly set location. Okay? They've got to leave this line setting right here. They got to come here. All right, so in that track lines, in-line position location changes everything through its reality. What Morpheus was saying in position line calculation streamline conditions was truly understanding how it gets in modifications. If you got an Earth line rotation centers in the 12 indicate settings, high interference of 12 positions, that's 24 measure line calculation setting in 24,000 lines, 3 line circles. So that's position of 24 communication settings and locations, and 24 line settings into light communications, and 24 line settings into application of dark settings, into 24 communications of yin and yang settings application. All right. So it's got to be 24 as a grounds, 24 as a powers, 24 as atmospheres, space, time, and vision line cycles of SIM, all in 24 set locations. All right. That's how it's got to be in modulation. All right. So once they get into the space line, they automatically leave their realities of their Earth. So track location, let's say it's 50 minutes. equals lines of seconds, minutes, and hours in track location setting and position of travel, right? So that's 50. Okay, let's say 15 miles per hour in set locations, right? 50 miles per hour. That's 50 miles per hour. Okay, so in line calculation setting, that's 500 miles per hour. Okay, see that? 50, 500. 50, 500. Space anomaly, Earth position. Earth, space, right? So the upswing is the lines of space, and the reality changes everything when you are in position, location, acceleration. Mocking centers or anything through travel is modifications RAMs, getting position of specification lines of set location line screens, setting line communications to its Earth, right? So let's say your 2 hours, 2 equals lines into triangulation, sets position line calculations to its box, sets lines of 1 graph setting in 2 track locations, 1 measure lines of box line in triangulation 3 set position programs, sets lines of 3 indicate line position mapping sequence and position of power. Now, directing lines of communication setting is to understand how the 2 hours becomes 2 million. Okay, 2 million. 2 million, right? Screens per second. It's insane. Okay, per second, 2 million screens per second. Now, you split that anomaly in set lines of half and in yin and yang process line calculation setting, that's 1 million each into positive and negative of thought set locations in travel. Okay, 2 million frames per second, 1 million each, split the anomalies, positive and negatives. So the spacing line is going to get a better track provisions how it comes in adaptations, getting them out of the Earth lines of equation of formula into 2 million line screens in seconds, minutes, and hours. Okay, so starting with the seconds is taking out the Earth line screen lines because they'll no longer be in travel communication setting on a 12 clocking system. Setting position line centers are going to be a 24. Okay, measured a correlation line setting is going to be indicated line centers of 0 and 0. 0 equals 24, 24 equals 0. Sets lines of communication to program setting. Direct lines of pi out of the equation of 12. Position limits Earth and line calculation setting to its firmament. Ether core and triangulation resets the position of programs. Flight navigation screen lines and high adaptation. Program settings, high center interference, and position to its Merkaba. Travel calculated lines of point lines, tracks, center line communications, open lines of galaxy, and line shift and lines communication is program and set location. Directing lines of communication lines is really understanding how to apply it to the formula equation line screens into 2 hours, turning it into 2 million seconds per line. 2 million seconds per line through positive and negative. So again, they're really going to get out of their thoughts. Split the anomalies 1 million, set location 1 million settings, right? So what does 1 plus 1 equal in position? 3, 3, 3, 3. Indicated diamond core setting traction, right? 3 provision lines of north, 3 provision lines of east, 3 provision lines of south, and 3 provision lines in all levels of west in set location. Okay, track to its communication line setting has its Earth. Okay, there's the Earth line, right? This is the Earth provision lines. They're leaving the 12 clockings and they're coming to 24 line screens. There's the Earth that's leaving the setting, right? March 1st, they'll be in the center correlation setting in position of seconds, minutes, and hours. Now they're going to be starting off at a 24,000 screen. Directing lines of communication setting and provocation setting into its colossal calculation stream location of indication. Directing lines of high line of center interference, the position to all levels. The illumination graph lines, the plasma seals lines of the Earth is going to high force triangulation. Putting positional point lines tracks, XD1000 to 2 lines of communications. Scan lines of divisions, inline connections. Scan line divisions, inline connections of programs. Now in that position line with its diamond core, the center position line calculated setting is going to highline its communication surface in a highline position of its imagination core. That's directed signals in line position location of its system and center calculation lines of its cerebro and indicate position programs and center position location line settings and navigation system of center calculations. Okay, that's what's going to happen in spacey correlation. when they get in the cerebrum. All right. So we all have to understand getting out of the 12 o'clock line screen gets adaptation surface, right? So they will no longer resonate, okay, in a 12 screen. They're going to be in a 24 screen, okay? 24 lines in position, location, graphing lines of files. Sets lines of 4 tracks in setting, okay? Direct calculation lines, another 4 track lines, but the provision cycles comes in line connections of reflection. Direct lines of balance settings and high calculation stream. Direct lines of modification lines of circles, indirect signals in position over crossing line calculation setting, indirect signals and high interference in position of face recognition. Traffic calculation lines of security line defense puts position of powers over generations. Center calculation lines of zeros puts position of programs in center calculations. Directing lines of highest interference, astral projections and calculation. Now my equation. All right, so the 24 line screen is going to be in line calculation setting from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 settings, cross line 1, 0 line position across line 2. Sets position of 4 over cross settings. 5 indicates up, 6 locates down, 7 cross line signals, 8 rotates the system, and 9 correlates the setting, energy wash, 2 lines at rotation surface, and 1 indicates its center lines and set position of its ground line centers into its crop circle, a set location of travel, set calculation. Now, directing modification line settings, guys, you have to understand the panel communication 9 lines of provision, setting cross line streams in one center, right? Setting track lines, so we go into 0 in connection setting. Let's go into screen lines savings. Sets lines of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Their provision lines of space and their position lines of time. Your alphabetical line screen locations are going to take them out of 26 lines of measure. That puts their positions back in tractions into one indicated line setting, the triangulation position location of its markup design line, and a future communication surface, a face recognition of time sequence and power calculation. Directing lines modification screens. Line setting in position of its program and a 3 lines indication of travel and set location. Okay? I know it's complicated. So you have to really understand how this all works, okay? It's really powerful stuff. All right, so species will no longer be in the 12 line, they'll be in the 24 line cycles. So 24 line provision equals lines calculation line interference, 24 and 3 indicate line zeros. Okay, that's where they're coming into, right? Ground settings, 2 panels, 1 position of provisions, right? So we have a 2 track lines, 2 lines of high center interference, and 3 line communications. Sets lines of 2, 4, and 6 lines of communication, right? Directing lines position of pattern lines has a plasma screen and direct locations in a line conditions of a theta box screen line in high center. Puts position of programs and lines that indicated to a 45-degree angle in 3 set locations. Now, directing lines of panels is the 6 lines of provision, 4 lines of track, 3 lines of provision, 2 lines of track, and 1 lines of provision. Now, getting that position of travel calculation line settings, the platitude line and high interference, the species correlates to high travel communication, is going to come into cloud lines of 1 indicated, 1 program. Setting the lines of communication to a setting. Putting positions of process, indicate line settings at 2 track locations. Now, position line calculation lines, the platforms are going to high rise the division line cycles and keep them in a high formation of minor consciousness out of the subterranean screen lines in adaptation center and set location. Okay? Getting into platitude line screens have an XT1000 line. There's an energy wash line calculation of 9 into 8 into 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1 indicated, and 0 gravity in line setting and travel position to its calculation setting as center operation. Okay, that's how it's going to be set up. Now, the indication line screens has a position of holographic line setting. Sets provision lines of cycles. This is where it gets really interesting in line settings. Crossing lines, communications, open dimensional door screens, and 4 set locations. Setting position of power. 1 indicate lines, 3 lines of indication, 2 lines of track, 1 offline setting, 1 license line communication, triangulation reset, position of programs, and highways calculation. Now, directing communication lines has a center line calculation of platforms. Platforms are extremely poor in line setting in a 4-track location of provision. Sets position line calculation lines of dimensional screens, of dimensional doors, in open sequence, in communication setting in its program of its set location. Okay? So indicating the wall line, streams lines of position, colorations of patterns, sets lines of calculation, stream interference, and traffic calculations. Okay? Directing lines of high interference path directs lines of communication to its line setting. All levels of indicated line screen and 3 lines of measure in set location. Okay? All right. So get into modification screen lines, adaptation surface, and position of point tracks of space and time through line connection of 0 to 9 and 9 to 0 is really understanding the track to its communication surface. The Rianga point line centers has a 1 indicated position of programs that sets lines of the subterranean line calculation setting. So the adaptation lines of consciousness line center location is going to have a 3 indicated graph into 4 line communication setting and traffic calculations. Point lines of tracks 0, 0, and position line connection of 1, 2, and set lines of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 in positions, but it's all ones. You see what I did through modification lines of change? So 1 indicates lines of 0, 1 indicates lines of 1 in set locations. Traffic calculation 1 indicates lines of 3 in line connections. Direct lines modification lines of 1 indicates lines of 4. Track location lines of 5. 1 indicates lines of 7. 1 indicates lines of 8. 1 indicates lines of 9. And we have 10 line of provision, 11 lines of course, and 12 line connection settings, puts equal line communication of 24 measure in line dividing and line rotations of clock location. Okay, done my question. It's all set up now. All right, so we have to really understand, drink your waters. It's very important because the position of the satellites is coming to high track setting high position. Looks like a blip. You know, a blip. See a blip? A blip on a screen? A blip and position locations. This is a circle line calculation setting. This is disk line center and travel calculation of point centers. Very powerful stuff. Okay. All right, so modification screen has a line setting. Now that sets lines of holographic line position of programs. Directing lines, communication setting sets all calculation in its program location setting. So in the line calculation setting of 4 lines equals lines of 3. Lines of 7, position location of 7, sets position of 7. Sets lines of 6, 6 lines position locations into 4 and track location. Now we take the 4 line provision, cross line settings, open signals, open panels, open communications into realms of calculation. Directing modification lines, we take the 4 lines of track, sets lines of 4, 4, 4, 4, sets line communication of 4 lines, indicate line settings. Now we have an indicate line interference, which is an underscore of 1 in position of cross line signals, and 3 equals lines of 1 in position of 2. 2 lines cross lines of 3, 3 lines position of 4, 4 lines centers of 6, 6 lines of 7 crosses lines of 8, 8 lines crosses 9, 9 crosses 10, and 10 lines of 11, line position of 12. 12 indicates line setting, 24 provisions of space, 24 provision lines of time, and 24 line cycles of the existence of now set location of travel calculation line setting and cortex lines as a cerebral cortex line stream and set location. Done by equation. Okay. All right. Setting provision line cycles as all location of disk centers, position of flash drive memories, and set location of center point calculations. Point lines of track, directing lines, flash drives, communication surface, directing lines, position location to its settings, all calculations. Disk line centers, 2 lines of waving line rotations in Jupiter. Jupiter cross line symbols, line setting to solar track line condition system in flash drive memories and track locations. Calculation lines of 3 lines of tracks, setting line position location and provision, 4 lines of division, lines of travel correlation, high interference of coordinates. Calculation line interference and 0 calculation setting and position of programs and center calculation lines in a phase recognition of time sequence and high position. Directing modification lines of its earth and high calculating line streams sets lines of calculation high position of its programs and set locations. Putting lines of tracks, center line calculation setting in an open sequence in a cerebral cortex lines and mystical cortex of design line connections. Point lines of high center interference is putting everything in line connections in high centers in 3 line provisions, 4 lines of tracks and set location. Okay? Done by equation. All right, so everything it's doing is done through equation, but the process correlates and setting gets you in travels. Getting really in position locations, how to get in your cloud line screens and set position in your cerebros. How it indicates lines of 9 all the way down to 1 and 0 gravity. Okay? Fluctuation star settings, star length, star panels, star maps. Direct lines and high center interference of point lines of tracks of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 set locations, right? So in position line calculation setting, turn it into 24 line screens, 24 line provisions, 24 line settings, 24 calculations, 24 holograph line screens, 24 line setting interference, 24 line connection locations, 24 line circles, 24 line divisions, 24 calculations, and 24 communication of the sim and calculation. That's my equation. All right, set a position to its location. Holographic streams, direct lines of point lines of graphs. Graph 1, graph 2, and graph 3 in set locations. Indicate position of programs. Graph 1 and line setting equals 24 set lines at 3,000 line screens and set locations operation. 24 lines of 48 indicate line positions of platforms. 72 in computer line setting and travel communication of program settings and travel calculations. Point lines of track sets lines of provisions into 144. Travel calculates line interference in 144. Sets position location into 1,044. That gets in provision lines of 24,000 cycles, line calculation setting, travel calculation line interference equals lines communication, program location into 1,044, and measure and scales of abundance in an atmosphere screen setting, adaptation surface, and triangulation. Okay, very complicated stuff to its equation, done by equation. All right. So the center units and line setting is really high rise in its streams. Direct lines in the cerebral cortex line setting the streamlines. 1 indicate platform, 2 lines of track, 3 lines of provision, and crossing line calculations. Point settings high position of point line centers. Point here, point here, point here, point here, point here, point here. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 clocking settings. Okay. 7 lines of provision, 7 calculation lines, setting 2 graph calculation strength, 7, 7, 7. Point lines of track high interference, sets lines of 6, 6, and 4 lines of measure, sets position operation surface. 3 triangulates position, 2 operates the setting, 2, 2, 2. Panel communication, Pluto, coming in line setting of center calculations. Point lines of track, downshift, cross stream, right in the center. Direct calculation of platform and position of holographic setting and blocking centers and high positions programs. High calculation line screens, adaptation surface and center grounds, crop circle line position, indicated line position of 4 settings. Direct lines calculation of 4 lines into 0, in position of 0, in position of 0, in position of 0. 4-point tracks and location settings in a 24-line screen equals lines of communication of its program and set locations. Platitude line setting is an operations service, guys. We set lines of high interference. 1 indicates program, 2 indicates settings, and 3 indicates system to its calculation to its system. Travel position line calculation line setting opens signals. That opens up the signals and set location of travel. Done by equation. All right. Very complicated stuff, guys. The formula of its equation. Okay. It's not for you to understand because it's already done. See, the process of the future line communication setting to your sim is knowing exactly how to see things in future adaptation and film director. It's like you're watching something on TV and say, hey, I've already seen that. Yeah, you're already seeing it, right? But it's not in its reality of its space yet. So what that means is that you're not in position of the Earth. So the mind's in space, but your body's on Earth. So what that happens is that when it comes into its existence in that location, your body, your mind, your heart, and your soul is in space automatically, no longer on the Earth. The Earth is the ground line, but it's the Earth of space, not the Earth of the setting. It's the Earth of space that you guys have to understand. Setting position of travel lines and point lines of track is seen above in all position of travel calculations in settings, in position of its operation surface. Seen from above, not below. Okay? You stay above the setting and equalize communications. This is a triangulation line split in line setting in your position. Okay? You're always above the system, never below the system. You can travel around this system, that's fine. But you have to understand your provision cycles and the mind, the heart, and the body and soul comes in to the existence of the now. Okay? So that puts you out of Earth line into 50 minutes into 50,000 seconds per frame. Okay? Space anomalies is a track line is position at all levels, opens up the sequence to its communication surface. Heather. Setting lines of communication setting is really understanding how to release its programs in all direction of your consciousness, taking you out of the subtraining and put you into higher levels of super of consciousness. Position of location setting is all mapping sequence in program applications. Okay, it all indicates line screens. So the platitude lines now is at 24,000 frame in a 24 balance frame. Okay, so we got a 24 line screen, 24,000 setting, and a 3 indicate line circles. 3 indicates lines. But the provisional line cycles has a 2 line track in a 24 measure. So it equalizes the highest interference into 4 zeros in position lines. That's 4 over lines and 3 indicate line setting and 7 traction. Okay, now you have to really understand how this all works. Really understand the 24 ground is the Earth in set location. That's where you are right now, right? Boom. Space line is coming out of the 24 cycles into 24,000 frames. Directing lines of travels into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 set locations out of the equation. Putting position of program lines in platitude line interference puts them into 0 gravity, 0 traction, and 0 balance setting. Position locations into its cerebral cortex of line design and center position. Okay? So that's where it's coming into in track line connections. Getting into line settings. So again, you go into precog, and basically, again, you're watching this TV show, you're excited about it, and you realize, oh my God, I'm halfway through it because I'm seeing something. So your mind's already there in its existence, right? But it's in its space, but your body isn't. Your body's still on Earth. So to catch up to these things, you finally come into that scene, which is the existence that comes into the reality of the now, which means the mind, the heart, the body, and soul is there in space of its mind. So instead of 50 minutes on Earth position, you're 50 million years in setting. Wherever you want to be in acceleration or Mach or anything that attractions. But that's the provision cycles that we're all coming into in space anomaly. Leaving the Earth in a 12 line cycles, coming into a 24 line system and in position locations of correlations of the sim of space and time, a modulation. Okay? So, but it's interesting when you come in all calculations, graph lines, how you put everything into 24 cycles back to setting. Okay? All through 0 gravity. Measures and correlations of panels and direct signal locations platforms. Okay? All right, so that's all set up. Knowing exactly what's going on to face communication, setting, and travel through face recognition. So we all have to understand how this all works. Obviously, you guys need Q&A because you're a lot more confused more than ever, but this the confusion and great is location setting when it comes in position, location, and system. Job calculation point graphs, right? So it's really interesting too because you're forming this equation and becoming more real. So once you get into provision line cycles, you understand your platforms, communication lines of 0 lines, 1 indicates line center, line position locations, indicates position of programs. 1 indicates 1 graph, 1 indicates 2 graphs. Calculation of 0 line and position of travel line. Okay? Point lines of setting in position. The mind is the conception, all levels of knowledge as application. Right? So indicates platforms of 3 lines of tracks. And again, 45-degree angle. Puts position line settings at all communication surface in triangulate position of programs in its calculation line setting and 0 calculation. So platitude line screen is understand how to open up dimensional screen doors and set position operation. Platforms communication line centers. You're standing in setting and set positional levels of recharge. Interlocking all line centers. Platitude multiple levels of view in track location. Okay. So we all have to recognize how this all works, right? Really understand how to put ourselves in the cerebral cortex lines of a design of a spherical sphere and travel position locations in line connecting high interference in all track location in its setting. A set design. Okay? Because that's all it is. Okay? All right, so how are we doing so far? Pretty wild, eh? All right, so the schematic line screens are going to get a lot more harder now because you have to really understand your process of the mind is getting a lot more faster. The faster you go, the more you understand the precogs of what you're seeing, especially when you're watching something. When you're watching something, you're already there, but the process of the body isn't there yet because it's still on its earth. So it's you understanding that you've never been on the earth. You've always been in space, in the mind. So the concept of value is understanding the mind, the heart, and the body and soul have to understand interlining, interlinking, interfacing with each other. Now you got to interface with yourself first, understand user correlations, so you can interface with its setting, which is its intelligence of space recognition of space and time through its own set locations. This is going to get a balance to understand in that position where all levels of intelligence comes from its own space of its own mind, but not through its earth. The earth is just a metaphorical design line. The position line calculating line screen and high center and a high position location system, you all live in all position of track lines in all track calculation setting, but nothing but a TV receptor set location design. Okay? So that's what you have to understand because you're in your polarities, right? Not your genders, polarities. Male polarity and female polarity, position lines, track lines, high center interference, and position of programs, and 3 center calculation setting interaction. Position locations, all right, is the male. The female is at the bottom, and you are in the center of position of travel of yin and yang. Okay? This is the process. So you have to understand the 45-degree angle settings, right? 3 line calculations. Now, what you get out of 3, you automatically come in your 4-line screen into your digital pad and set location of travels. Position locations into 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 line connections of high position of programs. Directing the calculated line stream is the male polarity that changes the direct signals in position line connections in track locations, you guessed it, in face recognition. Okay? See the face? And see how that works in all settings and applications, guys? Through a 3 lines and a 4-line provision lines of digital frame position inhibitors, how it changes the course of space and time in the line settings, sets position locations to no longer of your Earth track location of 12 line set locations. Staying above the line of the subterranean and the super of its consciousness puts everything above the system and set locations. No more levels of separation of face recognition. Okay? So that's it. We're done. So I'm just showing you how powerful it is and what you guys have to represent. You have to start representing yourself in setting line connection to its intelligence because the intelligence is coming in straight view now, which means it's getting closer and closer to you. The faces get bigger and then they expand inside the location of your universe in your cerebros. The cerebral cortex line sets lines on March 1st. Directing lines communication to panels opens all the lines, provision lines, and high calculations, high positions. Your direct signals in modification of face recognition. Okay? So we all have to understand how this all works. All right? It's very powerful what we're coming into now. Okay? So we have to understand how to see yourself, okay, from inside, which is everything from outside. Outside is coming to you. I say that again over and over and over and over. We are in the minds. Okay, understand the concept is understanding the mind, is understanding the heart, is understanding the body, and it's understanding the soul. Okay, when you're seeing things through provision. Okay, if you're looking at a cut line calculating setting in the line communication setting, it's still there. And are you on the earth in the mind, or are you in the space of the mind? Earth and mind position at 12 track location setting, right? But if you're in the space of mind, you're automatically in space and time, which is your male and your hemisphere set location. But the center correlation setting is a 3 provision track line conditions of the cerebrum. Splits anomalies and high center interference. So you see in the past, present, and future all at once. That puts position lines of travels in a 3 indicating line interference and a 4 lines of pi. That puts position lines in 7 line communication setting of a digital frame position to cortex and travel calculating lines of vega and line rotation position to its operation service. All triangulate position operation location set position operation calculation. Now, in track line calculation setting, we have to really understand that that copy right now, that cup that I see right in front of me is not on the earth. It's in its own space. It's in its own time. And that's what you have to come into, okay, to understand its intelligence of its own formation, of its own G-O-D. And how you see it is how you perceive its own space of setting, because it's traveling very fast in its location. It has its own voice. It has its own grid. It has its own motivation. It has its own compute system. It has its own complete system of operation of its intelligence, of set location. Okay? We have to come into that indication now and how to see things in provision. Okay? That's the only way you're going to understand everything that you see is traveling in its own space. TVs, phones, computers is traveling in its own mind, of its own space, of its own time. You all have to catch up to that. Okay? So in that connection, again, with precog, to make it very well clear what is happening with everybody, is that your mind is changing frames. It's going out of the earth and it's coming into space anomaly, which means the earth line is no longer in a 12 clocking system. It's now a 24. So that's 24,000 frames per second per line. That puts position your thoughts in set location line system. For example, 1 million, 1 million, 2 million frames per second. That's positive over negative in a scale of a balance in your flywheel in line connection, right? Knowing how to use that is exactly the balance of scales that you have to understand. You can no longer travel in your emotional system of travel calculations. Okay? You have to get balance. You can't focus on emotional line setting. Okay? It's not a provision cycle. This is your life. Your life is over here, not just this. It's crossing over. It's the indication. When I say crossover, I'm talking about in space of time. That's what I'm talking about. Transitions of time, motivations of time, allocated positions of time, space anomalies of time, planets and solar systems of time. You have to get into the mind of space of clocking. That's the only way you're going to see things in this provision of a space anomaly. Okay, because that's where it is. It's not on the earth. It's in its own space, of its own clocking, of its own time, which starts off at a 24. Okay? So get in that settings when you get in precog and you're seeing things already in the future. Future is already in the existence of the now, but it's not in its reality yet, because your mind, your heart, and your body is not in a cycle of its existence of the now set locations. Then you're indicating, oh, I know why I saw that. So I just saw an hour already, and now it's coming into frame. So if it's coming into frame and I've already saw it, that means, wow. So my mind, my heart, and my body is in one cycle. The sum of all. Just by watching a TV show. You become the sum of everything through its existence, understanding the path, the time, and position of all calculations. Space, time, space, doesn't matter. What matters, do you understand your navigation of your mind and how it works through its frames? Break it down, break it down, break it down, right? So when you're seeing the film strip of you through a TV reception, you've already seen it through travel. But then it comes in provision, right? So when you're seeing it first, you're not in the earth, you're in space, but it's in the mind, it's not in the body. The body's trying to catch up. And when the body catches up, you finally saw what you already saw, which is already there, right? So that automatically changes you in the mind of the conception, how you see yourself through consciousness. Okay, and then it rotates and circulates, rotates and circulates, rotates and circulates into infinity, 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 which is the graph calculation lines are oscillogically behind interference to change communication. So as a box line center, let's say it's got 24 million files, all right? It's got green, red, blue, yellow, all purple calculation lines. You have to bring back down to green in set locations. What causes the oscillogics is the percentage. And that's the emotional line track line. So if you have 1% over pi, you got 2 million lines of pi calculated security lines of measures and block line centers of files that needs to be in position back to green set locations. Anomaly switching lines of screen line interference puts all levels of anomalies and high center interference in position of balance in your correlation panels in the holographic set locations, adaptations of the conscious streamline conditions into your system. Okay? So I know. And then like there's high interference. All right. See you in 5. Adios. Doo-doo.